Hi guys, and welcome to Calm Night Radio Channel. Tonight we step into the uneasy dark of the English colonies in 1710, where a black child opens their eyes to a world that feels wide, raw, and already decided. You can almost hear the creak of damp wooden houses, the low murmur of the tide against rough docks, and the distant crack of an overseer's voice travelling over fields at first light. What does childhood feel like when even your earliest days are watched, measured, and claimed by someone else? What quiet truths do you learn when freedom is something you can sense in the wind, but not touch with your own hands? So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. And while you're here, comment below with your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, and you find yourself in an English colony where the morning begins long before the sun feels kind. The air is cool and wet. It carries the smell of river mud, wood smoke, and animals penned too close to the house. You wake on a pallet stuffed with coarse plant fibres, or sometimes on bare boards softened only by exhaustion. Nothing around you is built for comfort. The fabric against your skin scratches. The draught from the wall finds every gap. Even the quiet is thin, ready to break with footsteps. You are very young, but the world does not care. In 1710, black life in the English colonies is already tied to slavery in ways that feel settled to the people who benefit from it. Virginia, Maryland, South Carolina, New York, and other colonies each shape the system a little differently, but the result is painfully familiar. Black children are not simply poor children or servants waiting for release. In many places, they are born into a condition meant to last for life. Adults talk about this as if it were practical, orderly, and even natural. That is one of history's colder jokes. You grow up among many kinds of sounds. Roosters complain at dawn. Pigs snort in the yard. Iron pots clatter in the kitchen. Axes knock at timber. On larger plantations, you hear gangs of workers moving together in the half-light. The steady rhythm of hoes or the splash of feet through wet ground. In port towns, the noises change. You hear carts over stones, sailors shouting, ropes straining, gulls fighting over scraps. Either way, the day begins with labour humming underneath everything like a second heartbeat. For a black child, the first lessons are rarely spoken gently. You learn who may command you. You learn when to lower your eyes. You learn which doors belong to white family members, which corners are meant for servants, which voices carry danger, and which rare moments offer a breath of ease. This knowledge is not written in a little school book. It is pressed into you by routine. Childhood still exists, but it is thinner here. In some households, very small children are allowed a few early years near mothers, grandmothers, or older girls who watch them while stirring pots, mending cloth, or carrying water. You feel warmth in those moments. You smell sweat, ash, cornmeal, and maybe a hint of rosemary or onion if someone is lucky enough to cook with flavour that day. A hand smooths your hair. A voice hums low in the throat. Someone tells a story while working, not because life is easy, but because stories can make a hard room feel briefly larger. That tenderness matters. It is not small. Many enslaved families build childhood out of fragments. A game made from pebbles, a tune tapped softly on a bucket, a carved toy from scrap wood. Laughter that appears quickly, like sunlight through moving clouds. Historians know that enslaved children found ways to play because children almost always do. The human spirit can be stubborn in very inconvenient ways. A child may chase another around a yard, balance on a fence rail, or whisper jokes that make an older sibling cover a smile. Yet play is always vulnerable to interruption. An errand appears, a baby must be held. Firewood needs gathering, corn must be shelled. A white child wants company, or a mistress wants silence, or an overseer wants proof that no one is idle. In this world, your body is noticed not for who you are, but for what use it might soon provide. This is one of the strangest truths of early slavery. A child can be seen as both child and property at once. Adults who own enslaved people may call you little, laugh at your questions, or hand you scraps from a table. They may also discuss your future value with flat, business-like interest, a boy's strength, a girl's usefulness in a kitchen, a child's health, a child's growth. The language shifts without warning from household affection to calculation. It is a deeply unsettling blend, and people at the time often pretend not to notice the contradiction. The colonies of 1710 are not all identical. In the Chesapeake, tobacco dominates much of life, and labour is tied to long agricultural routines. In South Carolina, rice cultivation expands with brutal intensity, drawing on knowledge from West and Central African traditions while denying dignity to the people who hold that knowledge. In northern colonies, enslaved labour appears in towns, docks, workshops, and homes, sometimes less visible to later memory but no less real. Black childhood in Boston or New York may sound different from childhood in Virginia marshland, yet each is shaped by someone else's control. Even the weather becomes part of the lesson. Summer heat sits on your shoulders like a hand that will not lift. Mosquitoes whine near your ears, mud sucks at your feet. Winter brings stiff fingers, smoke that stings the eyes, and thin clothing that does almost nothing against the wind. Many enslaved children go barefoot for much of the year. You feel every pebble, every root, every patch of frozen ground. Touch becomes education. The earth itself teaches you how exposed you are. Food tells another story. Meals are often plain and repetitive, built around cornmeal, small portions of pork or fish, and whatever can be stretched from gardens or scraps. In some places, children eat mush, broth, or cold leftovers after others are served. Hunger is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is simply constant, sitting low in the belly, making every smell from the main house feel almost rude. Fresh bread can seem luxurious. Molasses is memorable. A roasted sweet potato can feel like treasure. Owners often describe themselves as providers. They say they feed, clothe, and direct the people they own. Historians still argue whether some enslaved children in smaller households experience closer supervision or merely a more intimate form of domination. The records are patchy, and the people writing them were usually the ones in power, which is terribly convenient for them. What survives clearly, though, is that survival depended on whatever those in authority chose to allow, and that permission could narrow at any time. Disease shadows everything: smallpox, fevers, intestinal illness, and respiratory infections move quickly through crowded, unsanitary conditions. A child's cough can become serious in days. A rash can spread fear through a household. Medical care is inconsistent and often harsh. Some remedies come from European folk practice, some from African knowledge carried across the Atlantic, and some from native communities whose own worlds are being crushed by colonization. People use herbs, poultices, bleeding, prayers, and luck. Luck, frankly, remains overworked. A mainstream fact of the period is impossible to escape. By the early 18th century, colonial laws had hardened around racial slavery, making black status increasingly hereditary and permanent in many English colonies. Children absorbed that reality long before they could name it. They saw who could leave and who could not. They saw which skin invited protection and which skin invited command. They noticed that even very old black people kept working, when white children expected age to bring some softness. Observing all this, you would not need a legal lecture. The law lived in daily practice. There are smaller, stranger details too. In some places, colonists believed African children possessed unusual resistance to certain climates or diseases, a self-serving idea that helped justify cruelty while ignoring the staggering death rates slavery produced. At the same time, some enslaved families quietly preserved naming customs, lullabies, foodways, and beliefs carried from African homelands or reshaped in the colonies. A child might hear a word whose meaning slips past white ears entirely, A rhythm on a table, a cautionary tale with two meanings, a blessing hidden inside ordinary speech. You learn to listen carefully. Adults around you speak in codes because open speech can be dangerous. Tone matters. Glances matter. Silence matters. A pause can mean do not ask again. A certain look can mean not here. A change in footsteps outside can empty a room of warmth in an instant. These forms of knowledge are social history at its most intimate. They are not dramatic events in neat documents. They are the tiny calibrations people make to remain safe. For some black children, the earliest years include contact with white children of similar age. They may share yards, chores, or awkward games. White children sometimes imitate adult authority with alarming speed. They boss, mock, test limits, and absorb racial hierarchy as naturally as breathing. Yet children can also show flashes of curiosity or dependence, especially when black nurses, attendants, or playmates are central to their daily lives. The relationship is uneven from the start. One child may be punished for speaking too freely. The other may never imagine punishment at all. That difference settles into the bones of colonial society. Night can be gentler. It can also be frightening. After dark, the workload slows, though it does not always stop. The air cools. Frogs begin their steady music. Smoke from the hearth hangs low. In quarters or back rooms, adults speak more freely, though never freely enough. Children lean against tired bodies and listen. They hear bits of memory from Africa, or from a parent's parent, blurred now by distance and pain. They hear news carried from neighbouring farms. They hear warnings about masters, patrols, prices, births, sickness, and sudden sales. Much of childhood education happens here, in whispers and half-light. No one can tell every detail of what a single child felt in 1710, and that uncertainty matters. Enslaved children rarely left written accounts from that age, for painfully obvious reasons. Much of what historians reconstruct comes from laws, sale records, plantation accounts, letters, travel descriptions, church writings, and later recollections. Those materials reveal a structure, not every heartbeat within it. Still, the structure is strong enough to see clearly. A black child in 1710 entered a world arranged to extract labour, limit freedom, and train obedience from the earliest possible moment. And yet that child was still a child. You can feel that truth in the small physical details: dust on your ankles, warm soup tin against your palms, the sleepy weight of your head against someone's shoulder, the comfort of hearing a familiar voice in a place built from command, the sting of being snapped back into usefulness, the confusion of knowing love inside a system designed to deny your full humanity. None of this makes the world softer. It makes the child more real. So you lie down again on rough bedding, listening to wood settle and embers fade. The room smells of smoke, damp cloth, and tired bodies. Outside, somewhere beyond the dark yard, the colony keeps breathing through ships, fields, kitchens, ledgers, and laws. Inside, your eyes grow heavy. You are young, but already studying the world with extraordinary care. In 1710, that care is not a luxury. It is one of the first tools you're given for staying alive. Morning begins with voices before it begins with light. Someone coughs in the dark. A door lifts on its hinges with a tired wooden groan. Ashes stirred in the hearth, and the air fills with that dry, powdery smell of old fire waking up again. You open your eyes into a room that does not belong to you, though your breath has warmed it through the night. That is one of slavery's first cruel tricks. It lets you live somewhere without ever letting you belong there. As a black child in 1710, you are not simply growing, you are being counted. Adults around you understand this long before you do. A mother looks at your hands and sees softness that will not be allowed to last. An older man glances at your legs and knows someone is already imagining how far they can carry water, wood, bundles, baskets, or tools. In many colonies, The law has settled into a hard shape by this time. If your mother is enslaved, you inherit her condition, not her laugh, though you may have that too, not her patience, though you will need it, her bondage. That is the inheritance the colony respects most. It is a strangely cold idea to place on a baby. English colonial lawmakers did not invent human cruelty, but they did become unusually organised about it. In earlier decades, the status of Africans and their children could be more uncertain in some places, twisted among servitude, slavery, baptism, conversion, and local custom. By 1710, many of those uncertainties had been narrowed on purpose. Colonial assemblies write rules that make black life easier to own, easier to pass down, easier to treat like land, livestock, or furniture with opinions nobody wants to hear. A child is folded into this arrangement from the beginning, often without a single dramatic moment. No trumpet sounds, no villain steps forward and twirls a moustache. The system simply waits at the cradle. You learn this through atmosphere before language. White adults speak of children differently depending on whose children they are. Their own infants are hopes, heirs, blessings, little promises wrapped in linen. Enslaved infants are also mouths to feed. Yes, but they are future hands, future births, future profit, future service. Even when people sound affectionate, there is often calculation under the softness. A mistress may pinch a baby's cheek and remark on strong limbs. A planter may ask whether a child is thriving with the same tone used for a colt. It is grim, and somehow they manage to treat it as ordinary. Ordinary as history's most dangerous costume. In the nursery or yard, you may be held by an older enslaved girl scarcely beyond childhood herself. She rocks you while standing, because work does not pause just because a baby is fussy. One foot sways, one hand pats, the other hand keeps sorting peas, twisting thread, or polishing a household object until it shines. Her touch is careful, the task is not. She has learned to split herself in two, to be tender and efficient at the same time. Many children first know love through people who are exhausted. The smells of infancy are not sentimental here. There is milk, sour cloth, damp wood, and the sharp mineral scent of lye soap. There are herbs drying from a beam. There is stale grease near the cookroom. There is sweat soaked into linen that cannot be washed as often as it should. You feel rough wool against your cheek, then a warm shoulder, then the jolt of being shifted because someone with authority has entered the room. Comfort comes in snippets. For many black children, naming carries quiet importance. Some are given English names by owners, ministers, or record keepers who prefer neat little labels. Tom, Bess, Jack, Nan. The names fit ledgers nicely, which is the sort of convenience slave societies adore. Yet families and communities may also use other names in private. Affectionate names, playful names, names carrying memory or meaning beyond the hearing of those in control. Scholars still debate how often African naming traditions survived intact in the English colonies at this date, because the evidence is uneven and filtered through hostile pens. Still, private forms of naming almost certainly mattered. A secret name, a nickname, a family way of speaking to you can become a small shelter for identity. Religion enters the picture early too, though not always kindly. Some colonists once argued that baptism might complicate enslavement, but by 1710 that excuse is wearing thin. Laws and customs increasingly make clear that Christian status does not free black people. So a child may be baptized, prayed over, or instructed in Christian language while still being held as property. Imagine the confusion. You're told that all souls matter before God, then return to a daily order where your body belongs to someone else. The contradiction is not hidden. It is built right into the sermon. You notice patterns in where babies are welcomed and where they are not. In the main house, a white infant's cries summon fussing advice, warm coverings, urgent footsteps, and sometimes a parade of women exchanging opinions. An enslaved baby's cries may be soothed with equal devotion by family members, but not with equal power. The people who love you cannot always control how long they may hold you, when they must return to labour, or whether you will stay with them as you grow. Their care is real. Their authority is not. This pressure shapes mothers in heartbreaking ways. An enslaved woman may return to work soon after childbirth, sometimes before her body is ready, because the rhythm of labour makes little allowance for recovery. She may carry her infant part of the day, nurse in hurried moments, or rely on other women and older children to keep the baby alive and quiet. Quiet matters. A crying baby in a world ruled by impatience can place everyone on edge. Yet babies cry. It is what they do. Their tiny bodies refuse the dignity of scheduling. At some plantations and farms, enslaved women continue field labour while pregnant, bending, lifting, hoeing, or transplanting with increasing difficulty. The colony admires production, not mercy. A child is born into that ethic at once. You do not enter a family floating on joy and rest. You enter one already stretched thin by commands, seasons, pregnancy, hunger, and fear of punishment. And still there may be singing. Still there may be laughter. Human beings are offensively persistent that way. Legally, the harsh logic becomes clearer as you get older. Birth does not place you on a path toward independence, as it might for some indentured servants' children. Birth fixes your status to that of your mother in many English colonies, especially where lawmakers have chosen to make slavery self-reproducing. This is a mainstream historical reality of the early 18th century, and it changes childhood completely. It means there is no countdown toward freedom tucked inside your existence. No expected release at adulthood, no ordinary coming of age. Time does not promise escape. Time makes you more valuable to those who own you. That fact settles heavily over family life. Every child is precious, but also vulnerable to attention from above. A healthy infant may bring relief to the enslaved community, since survival itself is uncertain, yet also dread, because growth invites exploitation. A toddler running barefoot across packed earth looks playful enough. An owner watching from a doorway may already see future labour. The same scene contains two truths at once, and they do not sit comfortably together. There are odd fragments of belief attached to children too. In some households, people worry over teething, bad dreams, fevers, and strange cries with a mix of English superstition, African practice, and practical guesswork. Charms may be whispered over a cradle. A protective object may be hidden nearby. Certain roots, beads, or bits of cloth may carry meaning invisible to outsiders. Not every colony, not every family, not every child. But enough to remind you that daily life is never shaped by law alone. It is also shaped by memory, fear, and the stubborn urge to protect the young with whatever tools a person has. Protection, though, has limits. A child can be hired out, gifted, lent, or simply moved within a household as needs change. Very young children might remain close to mothers or nurses, but by the age of 5, 6, or 7, many begin useful service in small ways. That age varies by place and circumstance, yet the principle is steady. Childhood is not a sacred period to be preserved. It is a short apprenticeship in obedience. You fetch water, you mind poultry, you sweep yards, you carry messages, you rock another baby, you stand still when told, you vanish when told. Useful children are praised, spirited children are corrected. Correction can arrive in tones rather than blows, though blows are never far away. A sharp word cuts through the room, a finger points to a missed chore. A mistress complains of laziness when a child is only distracted, hungry, sleepy, or bewildered by orders given too quickly. Some punishments are humiliating rather than brutal, meant to train the body into alertness. Stand there, hold this, repeat that. Do not fidget. do not stare, do not answer back. The body learns to brace itself before the mind fully understands why, and yet children remain observant in ways adults often underestimate. You notice who is kind when no one is looking. You notice who hides scraps of food. You notice which white family member is vain, which one is cold, which one drinks too much, which one can be distracted by compliments. You notice tensions inside the household itself. A quarrel between husband and wife can change the mood of an entire day. A debt can make a master harsher. A death can rearrange where everyone sleeps and works. Slavery is a structure, but it is lived through ever-changing moods. Children become excellent readers of weather made by people. The physical world keeps teaching too. You learn the feel of unfinished wood under your palm, the sting of soap in a cut, the sticky sweetness of spilled molasses licked quickly from a thumb before anyone notices, the softness of worn linen passed down too many times, the annoyance of fleas, the relief of sunlight on a chilly morning. These details matter because childhood is always made of details, even under oppression. Grand laws decide the frame. Small sensations fill the picture. Some black children in towns grow up among alleys, wharves, warehouses, kitchens, and tavern yards rather than open fields. Their experience of hereditary slavery still exists, but the scenery changes. They smell tar, fish, beer, horse dung, salt air, and smoke from many chimneys mixed together. They hear bells, wheels, sailors' songs, and arguments in several languages. Urban slavery can place a child close to information and movement, though not close enough to claim either. A busy port offers glimpses of ships leaving for places you cannot follow. That may be its own special torment. There is a curious and bitter fringe detail in the records of the era. Some white colonists like to describe black children as naturally suited to labour, as though endurance were a charming inborn trait rather than a demand imposed by violence. This fantasy helped them admire the strength they were extracting. It also let them ignore the obvious fact that children were often tired, underfed, frightened, and far too young for the burdens placed on them. People can believe astonishing nonsense when prophet asks politely. No child fully grasps the legal architecture around them at first, but you understand consequences. You understand that your mother cannot simply gather you up and walk away. You understand that white adults discuss your future in tones they never use about a kitten or a chair, because you are more valuable than those things and less free than either. You understand that your body is not being prepared for your own ambitions. It is being prepared for service. Still, there are moments when the world narrows to simple comfort. You drift half asleep while someone hums near the fire. You are wrapped in a cloth still warm from another body. Rain taps at the roof in a gentle pattern. A hand strokes your forehead to cool a fever. Such moments do not erase the larger truth. They resist it. They prove that even under slavery, black childhood contains attachment, creativity, humour, and care, however threatened those things may be. So the colony records your existence in its own chilly fashion, with a mark on a page, a mention in an inventory, a note of birth, a tally of dependents. Perhaps nothing at all beyond the memory of those who hold you close. But inside the living world, you're more than a line in a ledger. You're a child being named, watched, soothed, measured, and drawn into a system that hopes to define you from the cradle onward. The system is strong. Its paperwork is smug. Even so, your earliest life is not made only of ownership. It is also made of breath, skin, voice, hunger, warmth, and the fierce private meaning of being somebody's child. By the time the sky turns pale, work is already waiting for you like a person with crossed arms. The morning air feels cool on your face, but the ground is damp and gritty under your bare feet. Somewhere nearby, a bucket knocks against a well curb. A rooster cries with great confidence, as if he personally arranged the sunrise. From the cookhouse drifts the thin smell of cornmeal and smoke. It is not a grand breakfast smell. It is the smell of getting on with it. You are still a child, but that distinction grows less useful each season. In 1710, black children in the English colonies are often drawn into labour very young. Not always the hardest labour at first, and not always in the same way everywhere, but early enough to shape your body, your posture, and your sense of time. A child who can carry is told to carry. A child who can watch is told to watch. A child who can run is sent on errands. There is almost always something needing hands, and your hands are noticed. At first, the tasks seem small. Gather chips of wood from the yard. Scare chickens away from the garden rows. Bring a pail of water from the pump or stream, trying not to spill too much on your legs. Pick up fallen apples. Hold the baby while someone kneads dough or stirs a pot. Fetch the mistress's sewing basket. Stand near the door and wait to be sent elsewhere. You move constantly between waiting and doing, which is its own kind of training. Waiting can be tiring too. A great deal of childhood labour is not dramatic. It is repetitive, ordinary, and meant to fill every gap. You shell peas until your fingertips feel tender. You pluck feathers from dead fowl while the smell clings stubbornly to your skin. You scrape pots blackened by the fire. You sweep packed earth floors where dust rises in soft clouds and settles in your nose. You hold skeins of yarn while someone winds them. These jobs do not sound heroic. That is exactly the point. Slavery thrives on making burden look routine. In plantation regions, especially in tobacco country, children often begin with jobs close to the edges of field labour before being pushed further in. You may pick worms from plants, carry water to workers, gather leaves, or help with lighter sorting and handling. In rice-growing areas, the landscape itself makes labour feel heavier. Mud sucks at your ankles. Water reflects harsh light into your eyes. Insects whine around your ears. The air can smell green and stagnant at once, thick with rot and growth together. Adults move through it with practiced exhaustion. You trail behind, learning the shape of a work-day long before your bones are ready for it. In towns, the tasks sound different but carry the same lesson. Run this message to the shop. Hold the horse. Sweep the yard behind the tavern. Carry scraps to the pigs. Mind the doorway. Fan the flies from the table. Bring nails to the cooper. Return with kindling. Urban childhood can feel busy in a scattered way, with orders coming from several directions at once. Your ears become quick. Your feet do too. A mainstream fact of early slavery is that children were expected to become economically useful as soon as adults believed they could manage simple duties. There was no broad colonial idea that childhood should be protected for its own sake if the child was enslaved. The whole system leaned toward extracting value early, then more value later. What begins as helping soon becomes obligation. It has a way of sneaking up on you. Sometimes the work sits badly against your body. A bucket handle bites into your fingers. A bundle of sticks leaves splinters in your palm. Smoke makes your eyes water until tears run down without permission. Soap roughens the skin. A too heavy basket bumps your shins. You learn odd tricks from others. Tilt the pail like this. Wrap the cloth around your hand first. Step sideways on the slick bank. Keep your back straight if you can. Do not show strain if the overseer is watching. Advice passes quietly, useful and unsentimental. You also learn that work is never only about the task. It is about being seen doing it. A child who moves quickly may be praised as clever or useful. A child who hesitates may be called stubborn. A child who breaks something may be treated as careless even when the object was slippery, cracked, or much too heavy in the first place. White adults often read character into accidents because it suits them. It lets them turn every dropped bowl into a moral failing. Very efficient system, if you're trying to blame the powerless for everything. Among black children, labour also becomes social. You watch older boys chop, haul, tie, lift, and mend. You watch older girls balance domestic work with childcare, spinning, washing, and kitchen help. You imitate what they do, though never quite as smoothly. Sometimes they tease you. Sometimes they save you from embarrassment by taking over before an adult notices your struggle. Sometimes they are too busy to help. In this world, affection and fatigue live side by side. You do not stop being curious just because the day is full. In fact, work often sharpens curiosity. You want to know why tobacco leaves must be handled one way and not another. You wonder why certain herbs are hung to dry, why lye burns the skin, why the mistress trusts one girl with keys but not another, why some men disappear for days with wagons and return smelling of horses and road dust. Childhood questions rise naturally. The trouble is that some questions are welcomed only when they help the household. Other questions are treated as impudence, so you learn to ask with your eyes. There are sounds attached to every job. The scrape of a broom on hard floor, the soft patter of shelled peas landing in a bowl, the hiss when wet cloth touches hot iron, the slap of wash against a board, the click of knitting needles, the squeal of a cart axle, the grunt of a pig resisting its pen, the creak of leather harness. A workday is almost musical. If music were composed by people who never sit down, food work is especially constant. Children often help in the long chain that keeps meals moving, though they rarely control what appears on the table. You may grind, fetch, stir, carry, peel, or clean. The kitchen is hot, busy, and full of strong smells: onion, ash, grease, boiling cabbage, singed feathers, wood smoke, sour milk, damp wool. A stew pot sends up steam that feels almost luxurious on a cold morning. In summer, the same steam can feel suffocating. Hunger follows you through it all, made worse by handling food you may barely taste. Some households use black children as attendants to white children, which creates a curious and bitter little arrangement. You help dress a child who is no stronger than you. You pick up toys, rock a cradle, carry a cup, chase a runaway hoop, or stand by while another child complains about a ribbon. You become skilled at caring for comfort you do not share. White children may order you around in playful tones, already practicing the manners of authority. Their games can be your work. Their tears can become your problem. It is a sharp education in social rank. Historians still debate how much room enslaved children found for informal learning within labour itself. Some scholars emphasize the skills gained through observation and participation, while others stress that calling this training can soften the coercion involved. Both views catch part of the truth. You do learn practical things: how to tend a fire, how to carry fragile objects, how to judge weather by the smell of the air, how to soothe a baby, how to recognize spoiled meat. But you learn them because refusal is rarely an option. Skill grows inside compulsion. There are quirky fragments in the record that remind you children remain children, even while working. Some boys are scolded for turning errands into races. Some girls tuck shiny buttons, bits of ribbon, or coloured glass into hidden places as tiny treasures. Some children make whistles from reeds or practice balancing impossible loads just to show off. One can imagine a child stirring hominy with grave importance, then sneaking a face at a friend the moment an adult turns away. Play leaks into labour where it can, because youth is sly. Season changes alter your duties. In planting time, everyone moves with urgency, and even small children are drawn into carrying, scattering, watching, or fetching. Harvest brings its own pace, faster and more anxious, with adults measuring weather and daylight as if both were enemies. Winter does not mean rest. It means wood, mending, curing, cleaning, spinning, hauling, patching roofs, feeding animals, repairing tools, and finding ways to stay warm without wasting fuel. A child learns that every season has work hidden in it. Dutch tells you what season it is before a calendar ever could. In cold months, your fingers ache when they meet metal. In heat, shirt cloth sticks to your back. Straw scratches your ankles, mud chills your skin. Ash leaves a soft grey film on your palms. Wool itches. Linen, when worn thin enough, feels almost kind. By evening, fatigue settles in your shoulders. Though you may not have words for that feeling beyond simply wanting to sit, sitting is not always approved. Adults in charge often mistrust stillness in enslaved children. Idleness becomes a suspicious category, a thing noticed and punished. This means even the natural drift of a child's attention can be treated like disobedience. You pause to watch light shimmer on water. Someone asks why you're standing there. You listen to a distant fiddle for 2 breaths too long. Someone wants to know if the yard swept itself. The lesson is firm. Your time is not yours to lose. This makes companionship precious. A whispered joke while snapping beans. A shared eye roll over a spoiled task. A soft song carried under the breath. A contest over who can stack wood fastest. An older child showing you how to lift from the knees, then laughing because you still wobble. These are modest moments, yet they matter. They make labour briefly less lonely. They also build the social knowledge that helps a child survive inside a community under strain. In many places, girls and boys experience the drift into labour differently, though never cleanly. Girls may be pushed toward washing, cooking, spinning, sewing, childcare, and dairy work. Boys may be steered toward hauling, animal tending, outdoor errands, tool carrying, and field support, but need overrides neat categories. A girl may carry water until her arms shake. A boy may rock a fretful baby while trying not to drop the spoon he is supposed to be polishing. Slavery is practical when it wants something done, and suddenly all those tidy ideas about proper roles become flexible. You start to understand that labour is also performance. You must appear willing enough, brisk enough, aware enough. Too much brightness can be seen as cheek. Too little can be called sulking. A child learns to wear an expression suited to the room, not blank, not bold, not dreamy, not slow, just attentive enough to satisfy people who are never fully satisfied anyway. It is exhausting work, this managing of the face. There is also the matter of mistakes. Burn the porridge, and the smell alone announces your failure. Spill water across a floor, and everyone hears the slap. Lose a chicken, and the yard becomes a courtroom. Cut cloth unevenly, and the evidence sits in your hand. Children make mistakes because children are inexperienced. Slave societies dislike explanations that ordinary. They prefer discipline. So a dropped tray can become a lesson for everyone watching. Yet for all the strain, work can offer forms of knowledge that belong partly to you. You learn where blackberries grow beyond the fence line. You learn which cow kicks and which one only pretends to. You learn how long embers hold heat beneath grey ash. You learn which floorboard in the passage creaks loudest. You learn the smell of rain before clouds gather. These observations may begin as service to others, but they also become tools in your own mind. A child paying attention gathers quiet power. By late afternoon, the day changes texture. Light turns thicker and more golden. Shadows stretch across the yard. Sweat dries sticky on your neck. Smoke rises straighter as the air cools. Tired adults move with less talk and more purpose, wanting to finish what can be finished. You may still be carrying, scraping, shoeing, folding, fetching, soothing, or cleaning. Fatigue makes everything feel heavier, even the broom. And still there is one more thing to do. There is always one more thing, so you bend to it again, because that is what the colony expects from a black child growing up in slavery. Not innocence, not leisure, not an open future shaped by your own wishes. It expects usefulness. It expects quick hands and watchful eyes. It expects you to learn adult burdens in a small body and call that normal. But inside that body lives a child who still notices birdsong, who still feels the comfort of warm soup, who still wants to laugh at foolish roosters and crooked hats and the endless drama of geese. That child does the task because the task must be done. Yet the child remains there, looking out through tired eyes, alive to the world in spite of everything. By now, you know the day can be measured by textures as much as hours. Rough cloth in the morning, damp earth before noon, a wooden spoon polished smooth by many hands. ash settling softly on skin, hunger tightening and loosening like a cord inside the body. In 1710, for a black child in the English colonies, food and clothing are never just simple facts of life. They are small daily reminders of place, status, and control. You feel that truth as soon as you dress. Your clothes are usually plain, practical, and uncomfortable in ways that nobody powerful finds urgent. Fabric may be coarse linen in warm weather, rough wool or a wool blend when the air turns cold. The weave scratches your neck, seams rub under the arm. A shirt hangs too loose in one place and too tight in another, because it has likely been cut for usefulness, not fit. Many garments are handed down, patched, shortened, let out, repurposed, or simply worn until they are almost memory. A child may inherit clothing from an older sibling, another enslaved child, or even a white household member after much cutting and altering. The result can look odd and feel worse. Shoes are uncertain luxuries. Many children go barefoot for long stretches of the year, especially in warmer colonies. Bare feet toughen quickly because they must. You learn the sting of gravel, the slippery feel of wet clay, the prick of straw, and the cold bite of frozen ground on winter mornings. Soles thicken, but they never become indifferent. Every path tells you something. Packed dirt near the kitchen stays warm longer after sunrise. The boards by the well are splintered. The yard after rain is a sticky trap. The field edge hides thorns. Feet become readers of the world. Clothing marks rank inside the household with terrible clarity. White children, even in modest homes, may wear better linen, softer stockings, caps with trim, little jackets, ribbons, or tiny shoes with buckles if the family can afford them. Their garments announce care, investment, and hope. Yours announces economy. It says this body must be covered enough to work, protected enough to remain useful, and little more. A tear in your sleeve may wait a long time for mending. A white child's missing button can inspire a small domestic emergency. Still, people make do with skill. Enslaved women mend constantly. Needles flash in dim light. Thread is saved, knotted, reused, coaxed through cloth that has been repaired so often it feels more stitch than fabric. A garment may carry several lives in it. There is something moving about that, though not in a cheerful way. A shirt is not just a shirt. It is labour transformed into covering, patience transformed into survival. The smell of clothing tells its own story. Wool holds smoke from the hearth. Linen keeps the sharp, clean trace of lye soap only briefly before sweat and work reclaim it. Damp cloth souring in wet weather has a heavy, unhappy odour. Sun-dried laundry smells better, almost grassy when the breeze is kind. A freshly washed piece of cloth against your skin can feel like luxury, even if it is still coarse. Comfort becomes relative very quickly under slavery. Anything not actively unpleasant starts to look generous. Food works the same way. Most meals are simple because they must stretch. Cornmeal is common in many colonies, made into mush, porridge, hoe cakes, or bread. You may eat hominy, boiled corn, broth, beans, or scraps of pork if any are given. In coastal regions or near rivers, fish may appear more often. In some places, sweet potatoes, peas, pumpkins, rice, or greens help fill out a meal. The exact plate varies by colony and household, but abundance is not the guiding principle. The guiding principle is enough to keep people going, sometimes not even that. Breakfast might be a thin porridge eaten quickly before the day thickens with orders. It warms your hands if the bowl is hot, and steam fogs your face for a lovely moment before disappearing. The taste is plain, sometimes smoky, sometimes a little sour if the meal has stood too long. You swallow because hunger insists. Midday food can come hurriedly, perhaps cold leftovers, perhaps bread, perhaps a ladle of something boiled. Supper may be the most substantial meal, though substantial is a very flexible word in a world where a bit of fat in the pot can feel festive. Hunger is one of your regular companions. Not always dramatic, not always a sharp pain. More often it is a constant awareness. The smell of roasting meat from the main house reaches you before the taste ever does. Fresh bread can haunt the air, drippings spit in a pan, herbs bloom under heat, cabbage, onion, and salt pork fill the kitchen with a richness that does not guarantee your share. You become excellent at noticing what others leave behind. Children learn the geography of scraps, crusts near the cutting board, a bruised apple, bits of cooled porridge clinging to the pot, bones with flavour still in them, a spoonful of molasses. If fortune briefly loses its mind, these little finds matter. They are not treats in the modern sense, as they're opportunities. A child's eyes sharpen around food because the body teaches attention. A mainstream fact of early American slavery is that owners often frame themselves as providers, while rationing food and clothing at levels designed for economy, not well-being. Enslaved people were expected to survive, work, and reproduce within systems that frequently underfed and underclothed them. Children felt this directly in their growth, strength, and vulnerability to illness. The colony could praise order all day long, but a body knows when it is cold and hungry. In some households, gardens quietly soften the edges of deprivation. Enslaved adults may tend small plots when allowed, growing greens, beans, peas, squash, herbs, or other useful crops. A child sent to gather from such a patch experiences a different kind of food space. The leaves smell alive. The dirt is dark and crumbly under your nails. A tomato is still rare in many English kitchens, but herbs, roots, and hardy vegetables can make the difference between a meal that merely fills and one that nourishes. Where gardens exist, they carry more than produce. They carry skill, memory, and a little measure of control. Cooking methods reveal hidden histories. In South Carolina, rice preparation owes much to African knowledge, though white planters are very happy to profit from that expertise while pretending it appeared by magic. In Chesapeake households, corn and pork dominate many meals, yet African and native influences shape seasoning, techniques, and combinations more than elite records usually admit. Historians continue to debate the precise extent of retained Western Central African food traditions in different colonies, because sources are patchy and often dismissive. Even so, the kitchen tells on the empire. Cultures meet there whether power likes it or not. Children notice differences between special days and ordinary ones. On a butchering day, the smell of blood, smoke, and boiling fat fills the yard. On baking days, warm yeast and crust make the whole house seem richer than it is. At harvest time, fresh produce briefly brightens meals. During lean periods, the pot looks duller, thinner, and more resigned. Even feast days tied to the church calendar or household celebrations rarely erase hierarchy. Better food may circulate, but not equally. Still, the taste of something sweeter or richer than usual can stay in memory for years. There are curious little details in the margins of food history. Some children chew on fennel, mint, or sassafras twigs for flavour or comfort. Some lick syrup from fingers with ceremonial seriousness. Some know exactly where pears fall earliest, or where nuts can be gathered if no one is watching too closely. A roasted chestnut, a handful of berries, a crust rubbed in drippings can feel astonishingly grand when most meals are plain. Childhood has a way of assigning epic importance to very small victories. The body records shortage in quiet ways. Clothes hang oddly on thin shoulders, knees look sharp. Bellies swell sometimes not from plenty but from poor diet and illness. Skin cracks in dry cold. Hair may show the effects of nutrition, care, and stress. A child grows, but not always as steadily as nature intended. Frequent sickness makes everything harder. A fever burns through already scarce strength. Chills feel worse in a shirt too thin for the season. Recovery depends on rest, broth, warmth, and luck, with luck once again asked to carry more than its fair share. Washing and cleanliness also depend on resources controlled by others. Soap is harsh and precious. Water must be hauled. Laundry is laborious. A child may wear the same garment too long because replacement is delayed or washing time is short. Skin itches. Lice spread easily in crowded conditions. Bedding smells of old straw, dampness, smoke, and bodies. Cleanliness is desired by many, possible only to a point, and often discussed by masters as a moral issue rather than a material one. That is another colonial habit worth noticing, and deny people adequate means, then judge them for the result, very efficient, very smug. Touch remains at the centre of everything, the prickly hem against your shin, the blessed warmth of standing near the oven door in winter, the slick softness of animal fat on a wooden spoon, the crumble of cornbread in your palm, the shock of cold water over wrists reddened by work. These sensations are not decorative. They are the substance of daily life. A child understands the world through the skin as much as through thought. In larger households, the distribution of clothing can become a formal event of sorts. Garments are counted out, sometimes seasonally, sometimes irregularly, sometimes meanly. Children stand in line, are inspected, measured by eye, and handed what someone else deems sufficient. The process turns need into administration. It is hard not to feel the insult of it, even if you are too young to phrase that feeling. An extra shirt, a sturdier cap, a blanket less full of holes can become the subject of quiet hope. Blankets matter enormously. Night cold settles differently when covering is thin. You curl tighter. Knees draw up, shoulders hunch. Breath warms the small pocket of air near your face. In better moments, several children sleep close for heat, and the human closeness itself becomes comfort. Shared warmth is one of the poor person's oldest luxuries. The room may still smell of smoke and damp straw, but another body nearby can make the dark less severe. Food can also create brief islands of pleasure strong enough to challenge the day's harshness. A pot of peas seasoned well, corn cakes browned just right at the edge, fish fresh enough to taste bright rather than tired, greens cooked down until the bitterness softens, a pear warm from the sun. These are not grand banquet memories. They are sharper than that because they are rare and specific. A child learns gratitude, but also discernment. Plain does not always mean bad. Thin does not always mean hopeless. Yet too many meals teach the body not to expect delight. Sometimes adults hide little acts of kindness inside routine. A woman scraping the pot leaves a thicker spoonful for a child she knows is fading. An older boy pretends not to see when you pocket a crust. Someone wraps your feet in rags before dawn frost. Someone turns a garment inside out and patches it neatly so the least ugly part shows. These gestures are forms of care carried out under pressure. They do not change the structure, but they make survival less lonely. By evening, your clothes hold the whole day in them. Smoke from the hearth, yard dust, sweat dried salty at the collar, a faint sourness from spilled porridge, the smell of chickens if you have been near them, which is never a scent anyone writes poems about. Your stomach may be full enough to sleep or only quiet enough to stop complaining. Either way, tomorrow will ask the same questions again. What will cover you? What will feed you? How much? How often? Whether it will be enough. That is the hard truth of growing up in early slavery. Necessities are never simple gifts from the world. They are rationed, patched, stretched, denied, and occasionally improved by the care of people with almost nothing to spare. You learn not to take warmth lightly. You learn that a full bowl can soften an entire mood. You learn that cloth can scratch and still be precious. You learn that comfort comes in degrees, often tiny ones. And because you are a child, you still know how to savour them when they appear, which may be the most remarkable thing of all. The people you love are never simply the people around you. They are the people you listen for, the people whose footsteps you can recognise on packed earth, the people whose voices change your breathing when the day has been hard. In 1710, for a black child growing up in slavery, family is built through touch, memory, labour, and constant uncertainty. It is the warmest part of life, and one of the most fragile. You feel that fragility early. A mother may hold you close at dawn, then be sent away to the field, dairy, wash yard, kitchen, or another property before the sun climbs high. A father may live nearby, at a neighbouring plantation, in the same quarters, or somewhere you cannot reach often. Some children know grandparents, aunts, uncles, and older siblings as steady presences. Others know them only in flashes, through stories, visits, or names spoken carefully in the evening. Slavery presses family into shapes that do not match the tidy household ideal, celebrated by white colonists. Yet family remains real, even when the colony refuses to honour it. That refusal hangs over ordinary moments. You may sit against your mother's leg while she mends by poor light, feeling the pull of thread through cloth and the steady warmth of her body. You may follow an older sibling through the yard, imitating their walk until they laugh and tell you to stop being foolish. You may hear a man sing under his breath while sharpening a tool, and know from the tone that he belongs to your people, even before you fully know how. These simple recognitions matter deeply, because no law is protecting them. Love lives here without legal shelter. White families in the colonies speak often of inheritance, lineage, household order, and respectable domestic life. They write names into Bibles, wills, and property records with great seriousness. Enslaved families also carry lineage, but much of it lives in memory. Oral naming, ritual, and repeated telling. A grandmother remembers where a child's father was born. A mother receipts the name of a dead sister, so it will not disappear. A child learns which elder must be greeted first, whose blessing matters, which stories are not to be mocked. This is family knowledge, and it has to travel by voice because paper belongs mostly to those in power. The room around such moments is rarely peaceful in the grand sense. Smoke drifts low from the hearth, a baby fusses, someone coughs. Shoes, if there are shoes, sit crooked by the wall. Damp cloth hangs to dry with only partial success. Supper smells of cornmeal, onion, maybe a trace of pork if luck has made a brief visit. Yet within this rough setting, affection can feel very refined. A hand smoothing your hair, fingers checking your forehead for fever, a joke offered at exactly the right moment, a warning delivered quietly so you do not make a dangerous mistake. Care is practical here. It does not have the luxury of being decorative. A mainstream historical fact is that enslaved families in the English colonies had no secure legal protection against separation by sale, debt settlement, inheritance, gift, or relocation. Children could be removed from parents. Spouses could be owned by different people. Siblings could be divided without ceremony. This was not a side effect of slavery. It was one of its normal powers. The system claimed authority over the intimate structure of black life, and treated that authority as routine. Children grasp this through fear before they understand the machinery behind it. You notice when adults go quiet after the master speaks to a visitor. You notice when a healthy young man is looked over too carefully. You notice the way your mother's face tightens if someone mentions money, debt, or a distant farm. A child may not understand bookkeeping, but a child understands dread. It enters the room like cold air. Sometimes separation happens suddenly. A person is called away. A wagon is loaded. A bundle appears that was not there at breakfast. Farewells may be hurried, restrained, or dangerously incomplete. Open grief can invite punishment or contempt from those who insist they have every right to reorder your life. So sorrow often appears in compressed form. A tight embrace, a long look, a child clinging to a skirt, a grown man turning his head away too quickly. The emotional violence is enormous, even when the scene remains outwardly plain. At other times, Separation is slow and uncertain. A father hired out to another place returns only occasionally. A mother works in the main house and sees her children mostly after dark. An older sister begins sleeping elsewhere because her labour is needed close to the mistress or nursery. Distance does not always begin with sale. It can begin with logistics, command, and convenience. Slavery is talented at thinning a family little by little. Still, kinship adapts. Many black children are raised not only by parents, but by networks of women, elders, and older children. Someone braids your hair. Someone teaches you how to carry water without sloshing half of it onto your ankles. Someone tells you what not to say in front of certain white people. Someone slips you a crust. Someone pulls you aside before a punishment becomes worse. These relationships can be as important as blood. The colony may call them informal. Your life does not. Historians continue to discuss how closely African family structures and child-rearing customs survived in the early 18th century English colonies. Records rarely give clear answers because the people making the records were not especially interested in black interior life unless it affected labour. Yet enough evidence survives to show that extended kin, fictive kin, and community parenting mattered greatly. Families rebuilt themselves under pressure, using available ties rather than waiting for approval from the legal order. That rebuilding took creativity as well as endurance. Children also learned family through stories, not polished storybooks, of course. More often through repeated fragments shared while hands are busy. You hear about a relative with a stubborn streak, a woman who could calm any baby, a man who escaped once and nearly made it, an elder who remembered words from across the ocean, a child who survived an illness everyone feared would take him. These stories preserve people against erasure. They also teach behaviour. Be clever like this one. Avoid trouble like that one. Remember who you come from. Even if the record book does not bother. There are quirky traces of family feeling and small handmade objects too. A carved doll from scrap wood. Beads saved and restrung. A little pouch with a root or charm inside. A spoon smoothed by use and passed down because it belonged to somebody important in the family. Such items may look insignificant to outsiders. To a child, they can hold a whole world. Touching them means touching continuity. Yet nothing removes the risk surrounding parenthood itself. Enslaved mothers face a cruel double burden. Their children are their deepest attachments and also, in the eyes of owners, future property. White adults may praise a woman's fertility in one breath and disregard her pain in the next. A child grows up sensing that their very existence draws two opposite kinds of attention. One from family, full of feeling. One from the system, full of calculation. It is hard to imagine a more disorienting atmosphere for childhood. Fathers occupy a complicated space in the records because colonial documents often fail to acknowledge them, unless ownership or discipline makes them visible. But their presence in children's lives can still be profound. A father may teach practical skills, pass on warnings, shape a child's courage, or simply offer the steadying effect of being there. Some children know their fathers intimately, others know them at a distance, through occasional visits or the stories of women and elders. Some know only absence. Slavery creates all these patterns at once. The body remembers attachment in physical ways. The scratch of a wool sleeve when someone pulls you close. The rhythm of walking beside an older sibling whose stride you try to match. The smell of smoke in a mother's hair. The roughness of a father's hand. The shape of a lap that has soothed you through fever. These sensory memories can outlast clear chronology. A child may not know dates, but the body keeps its own archive. Illness sharpens family bonds and fears. When a child falls sick, family members improvise care with what they have. Cool cloths, herbal infusions, broths, prayers, humming to settle panic, sitting wakeful through the night while the room smells of sweat, damp linen, and old fire. Recovery can bring immense relief. Loss can leave a silence that changes the shape of the quarters. infant and childhood mortality are high in this period for everyone. But poverty, hard labour, poor nutrition, and cramped living conditions make survival especially uncertain for enslaved children. Every family knows this. Even when they do not speak it aloud, children are perceptive around grief. You notice when an adult stares too long into the fire. You hear a song stop halfway. You feel the room becoming careful around a name. In communities where formal mourning may be constrained, remembrance settles into repeated gestures. A particular saying kept alive. A place at the hearth no one quite fills. A habit of mentioning the dead at quiet moments. Family continues partly through these small acts of witness. White owners sometimes imagine themselves paternal, benevolent, even family-like toward the people they enslave. This is one of slavery's most offensive fictions. It confuses control with care and expects gratitude for domination. An owner may feed a sick child, intervene in a dispute, or spare a mother a task for one day, then sell a relative the next season if finances demand it. The household can contain moments of human feeling and still be built on violence. Those truths do not cancel each other. They make the structure more disturbing. Children learn quickly who belongs to them in the real sense, not who claims authority, who comforts, who warns, who shares, who remembers. Even joy inside family life carries tension. A birth brings excitement, relief, and nervous jokes. A marriage recognized by the community, whether or not the law respects it, can bring singing, teasing, and rare brightness. A successful reunion after time apart may fill a yard with laughter, yet everyone knows how temporary any arrangement might be. Happiness is not absent, it is alert. Sometimes nighttime offers the best conditions for family life. Work slackens, the air cools, crickets start their long patient music, firelight softens faces. In those hours, people speak more like themselves. A child may rest against a grandparent and hear a tale full of wit, warning, and mystery. You may watch shadows move over the wall while adults trade news too serious for daylight. You may drift asleep to the sound of murmured conversation, feeling held inside a circle larger than any one person. That sense of belonging is powerful because the world outside the room keeps denying it, and yet belonging persists. A family under slavery is not weak because it is vulnerable. It is strong because it continues forming despite vulnerability. It teaches names when records erase them. It teaches loyalty when the market shatters it. It teaches tenderness where the larger system rewards hardness. For a child, that training matters as much as any chore. Family gives you language for yourself that ownership cannot fully supply. So you grow up measuring love not by guarantees, because guarantees are scarce, but by acts. Who saves you a seat close to the warmth? Who notices your torn hem? Who covers for your mistake? Who searches for you when you wander too far? Who says your name in a voice that means home, even in a place that does not belong to you? That is how black family life survives in 1710. Not safely, not easily, but with a depth that the colony cannot quite extinguish, however much it tries. You learn very early that the white household runs on moods as much as rules. Written laws matter, of course, and spoken orders matter even more, but the daily truth is often hidden in the angle of a face, the speed of a footstep, the sound a door makes when someone is displeased. For a black child in 1710, survival depends on reading all of this with unusual care. You become an observer before anyone thinks to call you one. Mourning in the main house has its own character. Floors are cool underfoot. The air smells of ashes being stirred, damp wool cloaks hung near the entry, and breakfast beginning somewhere deeper inside. If there has been rain, the scent of wet earth travels in every time the door opens. Light slides across pewter, wood, and glass, touching objects you're expected to clean, carry, polish, or avoid. A house can look still from the outside and feel full of tension within. Even silence says something. If the mistress speaks softly, servants often move faster. If the master clears his throat twice before breakfast, everyone notices. If a chair scrapes back too sharply, people glance up without seeming to glance at all. White children may tumble into the morning noisy and entitled, while black children learn to enter spaces carefully, almost testing the air first. It is not that you are naturally timid. It is that the house rewards caution and punishes mistakes unevenly. This is one of the central social lessons of early slavery. A black child must study white behaviour constantly, because white behaviour shapes the terms of daily safety. You learn who can be approached directly and who must never be interrupted. You learn which member of the family dislikes noise, which one cares about polished shoes, which one notices dust on a shelf, which one becomes dangerous after drink, and which one can be distracted by flattery or gossip. None of this appears in a formal lesson. It is absorbed in passing, then remembered because forgetting has consequences. In smaller households, this knowledge can become especially intimate. There are fewer rooms to hide behind, fewer people to absorb the force of a bad temper, and often more direct contact between white family members and the enslaved children who serve them. You see arguments. You hear sighs. You recognize the difference between ordinary irritation and the kind that spreads outward through the whole day. A house can become stormy without a cloud in sight. Children in these spaces are often expected to be useful in quiet ways. Hold the basin, fetch the keys, mind the baby, close the shutter, carry the message, brush the stool, stand near the door until needed. Each task asks for more than physical effort. It asks for timing. If you arrive too early, you are in the way. Too late, and you are called slow. If you speak too loudly, it is impudent. Too softly, and it is sulking or stupidity. A child learns to place words with the care of someone setting down fragile china. White households are full of visible hierarchy. The master may command the broad direction of things, but mistresses often control rhythms of domestic life with intense precision. They decide what must be washed, mended, boiled, baked, carried upstairs, warmed by the fire, aired in the sun, or stored from sight, for black girls especially. This can mean long exposure to the moods and standards of white women who expect obedience dressed as neatness. For black boys, household roles can be more mixed, but many still move through these same currents while also handling errands outdoors, stable work, or service at the table. A mainstream fact of the period is that enslaved children were commonly integrated into white domestic households, not as family members in any equal sense, but as labouring dependents whose proximity increased supervision and control. Intimacy did not reduce inequality. Often it sharpened it. Living close to power means you see it up close, hear it clearly, and feel its smallest changes. You also become familiar with white childhood from an awkward angle. White children may treat you as companion one moment and subordinate the next. They expect games on their terms, service without asking politely, and attention when bored. They may pull you into play that is really rehearsal for dominance. Be the horse, fetch the ball, stand still while I dress you in nonsense. They imitate adults with eerie speed. Yet their dependence on you can also expose something strange. A white child may cry if you are sent away, may demand your company, may trust you with secrets. The hierarchy remains absolute, but children often reveal its absurdity without meaning to. At table, the lessons grow even sharper. You notice who eats first, who waits, who serves, and who clears. You smell roasted meat, butter, ale, onions, herbs, and fresh bread more often than you taste them. A dining room is a school of manners for the powerful and a school of observation for everyone else. You learn what counts as refined behaviour in people who may later shout over a broken cup. Napkins folded neatly, bows performed, grace spoken, teeth gnawing a bone with no particular grace at all once they think nobody important is looking. You notice everything. The contradiction between Christian morality and slaveholding life sits heavily in these homes. A child may hear prayers morning and evening, scripture read aloud, sermons discussed over supper, and instructions about humility or kindness repeated with solemn satisfaction. Then the same household may whip a servant, threaten a sale, mock a black person's grief, or dismiss suffering as laziness. Historians still argue about how deeply some colonists recognise this contradiction in private, but the daily evidence suggests many simply learn to live with it by narrowing the meaning of neighbour, soul, and mercy until those words no longer troubled them much. Black children notice hypocrisy sooner than adults would like. You learn to read faces during church-going too. In some colonies, enslaved people attend services in limited or segregated ways, sometimes under supervision, sometimes barely included, sometimes preached at more than welcomed. In these moments, white households display piety almost as part of their public furniture. Clean collars, stern expressions, polished shoes, proper silence. Yet once the service ends, ordinary command returns with impressive speed. A child sees that public virtue and private power often walk hand in hand. The physical spaces of the house become maps in your mind. Which stair creaks, which latch sticks, which room smells of lavender and linen, which corner stays cold all winter, which passage lets you hear conversations not meant for you, which window gives a view of the yard, which threshold is safe to cross only when summoned. Architecture itself teaches rank. Large rooms belong to those with authority. Small hot backspaces belong to work. Children feel these divisions bodily. Where you may stand matters. There are also the house's objects, each carrying risk, delicate cups, heavy platters, candlesticks that drip wax onto your fingers, mirrors that seem unnaturally grand, books you're not meant to touch, wigs perched absurdly on stands like sleepy little animals. A child handling household objects becomes careful, partly from training and partly from fear. Fine things seem to demand apology before you even pick them up. Breaking one can turn the whole house against you for an hour. A curious fringe detail from the era is how often white adults spoke of enslaved children as naturally cheerful or simple, especially when those children had learned to smile, nod, and move quickly in ways that reduced punishment. Colonists sometimes mistook performed caution for contentment. It is a convenient misunderstanding. If a child is watchful because danger is real, the master may call the child well-behaved, and imagine gratitude where there is really strategy. Strategy matters. You begin to understand which truths can be spoken aloud, and which must remain folded inside. If the mistress asks who spilled the milk, you weigh honesty against consequence in a flash. If a white child starts mischief and expects you to share blame, you read the room before deciding whether silence will save you or sink you. If visitors arrive, you notice whether the household wants to seem generous, orderly, wealthy, godly, or all four at once. On such days, your posture may be part of the display. Children also absorb language from these environments. You hear the cadences of command, politeness, insult, prayer, bargaining, and gossip. You learn when white adults speak to impress one another and when they speak plainly, because they think no one important is listening. Often they do not count black children as listeners. This is a mistake on their part. A child standing by the hearth can gather a surprising amount. Debts, marriages, crop failures, births, illnesses, rumours of war, prices, wills, quarrels with neighbours. The household talks, and you learn. Not every white person behaves the same way, and children notice differences keenly. One mistress may be sharp-tongued but predictable. Another may be smiling and far more dangerous. One master may ignore household detail until suddenly enraged. Another may monitor everything with exhausting precision. An elderly aunt might slip you a crust of bread when nobody looks. A teenage son may test his authority in petty, cruel ways. Variations in personality do not erase slavery, but they shape its daily weather. You may also witness white vulnerability, though never on equal terms. Illness in the household brings fear and disarray. A fevered child cries through the night, A master weakens and everyone whispers. A mistress who usually controls every room suddenly leans on a chair for support. Seeing this can be strangely unsettling. The people who seem all powerful are still bodies. They cough, panic, age, and die like everyone else. Yet even in weakness, they often retain command because the structure around them keeps obeying. Touch plays its part in this education. You feel the starch of fine linen that is not yours, the slippery smoothness of polished banisters, the heat from a silver dish just lifted from the kitchen, the weight of a sleeping white toddler against your shoulder when your own arms are tired, the splinter hidden in the underside of an elegant chair. Domestic grandeur and domestic labour are always touching each other. At times, a black child may be praised for being clever, quiet, or helpful in a household setting. Praise can be dangerous in its own way. It may bring better tasks, closer scrutiny, jealousy from white children, or expectations you're still too young to carry. A child learns not to trust kindness too quickly when kindness often serves usefulness. Yet small approvals may still matter. Human beings are not made to be indifferent to gentleness, even when gentleness arrives from compromised hands. Some of the hardest lessons concern speech. You learn when not to answer a rhetorical question, when a direct answer will sound insolent, when to say yes, ma'am, and when to vanish entirely. This careful handling of language is a form of social intelligence under pressure. It demands that a child track status, mood, timing, and tone all at once. People later call enslaved communities shrewd, guarded, or good at reading others, as if these were charming cultural flourishes. In truth, many of these skills were drilled by danger. By evening, the house settles into another rhythm. Candles flicker, rooms smell of wax, supper, damp cloaks drying, and tired bodies. White family members may relax into storytelling, accounts, prayer, or complaint. Black children still move through the edges, clearing, fetching, rocking, folding, listening. The work softens only a little, yet your mind remains active. You have spent the day reading a world that never stops giving off signals, so you grow up in close view of white domestic life, learning its surfaces and secrets at the same time. You see polished manners and sudden cruelty, prayers and punishments, affection and ownership occupying the same rooms without shame. You study people who think they are teaching you service, while you're really learning something broader and darker about power itself. And because you are a child, you learn it with extraordinary speed, carrying that knowledge quietly in a small body that must appear harmless, even as it understands far more than the household imagines. Even in a world built to control your body, there are things that move where control cannot easily follow. A melody, for instance. A rhythm tapped with 2 fingers on a tabletop, a phrase whispered at the end of a long day. The shape of a story that means one thing on the surface and something older underneath. For a black child in 1710, these quiet inheritances matter because they carry memory when almost everything else is made uncertain. You first notice them in sound, not the loud public sounds of the colony, though those never stop, not the wagon wheels, barking dogs, clatter of pans, shouted orders, gulls over the docks, or wind through split fence rails. You notice the other layer, the low humming of a woman stirring a pot, the playful chant older children use to keep pace while working, the soft answer another voice gives from across the room, the rhythm of hands slapping cloth, not quite a song and not quite silence. Such sounds make a child feel less alone. Music is not always formal. In fact, formal would be rather ambitious for a tired evening with a little food and less privacy. It may be only a fragment of melody, carried by memory and adapted to new conditions. It may be call and response between workers who cannot speak openly. It may be a cradle song that calms a baby while also calming the singer. The beauty of it lies partly in its flexibility. A tune survives by bending. You feel it physically. The vibration of a voice through the shoulder you're leaning on. The soft thump of a heel keeping time on hard ground. the hush that settles when a familiar line begins. Children learn these patterns quickly. Before you can explain what they mean, your body already knows when to sway, when to listen, when to answer, and when to fall quiet because the room has become serious. A mainstream historical truth is that enslaved Africans and their descendants preserved and reshaped cultural practices under extreme pressure, including music, storytelling, spirituality, naming habits, healing knowledge, and forms of communal expression. Much was altered by the violence of the Atlantic world. Much was hidden. Much was blended with Christianity, local custom, and whatever conditions allowed. But the presence of continuity is unmistakable. People carried more across the ocean than their captors understood. Children are often the place where that carrying becomes visible. An elder corrects the way you pronounce a name. A woman laughs and tells you not to speak over a story's important pause. Someone shows you how to clap on a certain beat. Someone else gives a warning through a folk tale about a trickster who survives because he is small, quick, and underestimated. You listen with the greedy attention children reserve for anything half playful and half forbidden. The lesson slips in beneath the pleasure. Stories do quiet work. Some explain the world, some entertain, some disguise advice in animal voices and absurd situations. A clever rabbit, a foolish fox, a boastful creature meeting a sharper one. These tales travel well because they can seem harmless to outsiders while carrying sharper meaning for those inside the community. A child hears laughter, an older listener hears strategy. Both are correct. Historians continue to debate how directly particular stories, symbols, and practices in the early English colonies can be traced to specific African regions, because documentation is incomplete, and colonial observers often misunderstood what they saw. Still, many scholars agree that important continuities endured, especially where communities were large enough to sustain shared habits and where African-born adults remained present. The uncertainty concerns exact paths, not whether cultural memory existed at all. It certainly did. Religion sits inside this world in a complicated way. White colonists often want Christian obedience from the people they enslave, but not Christian equality in any serious sense. So a child may hear biblical stories, prayers, and sermons alongside older practices of blessing, protection, healing, and spiritual caution that do not fit neatly into English religious categories. A woman may pray over you in the name of God and also tuck a protective object nearby. A man may quote scripture and still trust signs in dreams. A child growing up in this setting does not experience such mixing as strange. It is simply how meaning is carried. Night is when much of this deepens. The workday loosens its grip a little. Firelight turns walls amber. Smoke hangs in the rafters. The air smells of embers, damp cloth, and tired bodies. In that softer darkness, speech changes. People are still careful, but less guarded than under a master's direct eye. Someone begins a song so quietly you almost think you imagined it. Another joins, then stops halfway, smiling to themselves. An elder tells a story with pauses that make the children lean in. The room becomes a place of teaching without looking like one. You learn memory through repetition, a phrase said many times, a name spoken with respect, a prayer formula, a warning attached to a place in the woods or a stretch of marsh. Which plant cools fever? Which root settles the stomach? Which elder to ask before you wander near water after dark? These teachings are practical, spiritual, social, and emotional all at once. They tell you how to live and also how to belong. Belonging matters because slavery works constantly against it. The larger system tries to reduce people to units of labour, but community pushes back by insisting on personhood, not with speeches. Usually with ordinary gestures, greeting someone properly, remembering a birth, marking a death, sharing food, however little, teasing a child into confidence, defending a tired mother's right to a few breaths of rest. Such acts may look small from outside. From within, they are how humanity is maintained. There are fringe details here that historians find in surprising places. Protective bundles hidden in walls or under thresholds, charms made from beads, shells, roots, or bits of metal, patterns of burial and remembrance that do not fit neatly into English custom. Colonial records rarely describe these things with sympathy. More often they call them superstition, heathen nonsense, or disturbing habits, which is often a useful clue that something meaningful is taking place. A child does not need a scholar's language to sense that certain gestures carry weight. You notice the serious tone used over a newborn, the way someone touches the doorway before leaving, the extra care taken with the body of the dead, the silence that follows a troubling dream, the manner in which some names are spoken low, with respect that goes beyond ordinary conversation. These patterns tell you that life contains layers, and not all of them are visible to those in power. Resistance in childhood is often small and woven into daily behaviour. It is not always escape or open rebellion, though those exist in the wider world and circulate as rumour. Often it is slower than that, holding on to a song, sharing food from a hidden pocket, warning another child before danger arrives, pretending not to understand an unkind instruction until a safer moment comes, protecting a younger one from blame, keeping a secret, refusing inwardly even when outward compliance is required. These actions do not overthrow the system. They keep the self from being surrendered too easily. You learn that silence can be active, not empty. White observers sometimes mistake stillness for submission, but among black children and adults, quiet can mean caution, judgment, listening, planning, or grief too deep to display openly. You become skilled at carrying meaning under a calm face. This is not because you are naturally mysterious. It is because too much openness is expensive. There are also moments of delight that feel like a kind of resistance simply because delight was never meant for you by the structure around you. A joke told so well that even the sternest elder almost laughs aloud. A dance step invented in a patch of yard before someone says enough. A game played with stones, bones, nutshells, or scraps. Children can transform almost anything into play for 5 brief minutes. That talent is not trivial. It is evidence that the imagination remains alive. Touch keeps these memories grounded. The warmth of another child pressed beside you while listening to a tale, fingers tapping a beat on your arm, the smoothness of a bead turned over in your hand, the dry texture of an herb bundle, the softness of ash cooling near the hearth. The world of spirit and memory does not float above the body. It travels through the body, through repeated acts and sensations. Some children hear words from African languages or language patterns that survive in fragments, especially where African-born adults are numerous. Others grow up in communities where those older languages have already been transformed heavily by time, mixing, and coercion. Either way, speech itself can carry memory, a rhythm of phrasing, a proverb, a particular way of blessing or scolding. Language bends, but it does not always break. The colonial world often fears what it cannot fully hear. Gatherings of black people, especially at night, can attract suspicion. Drumming, dancing, or any concentrated communal expression may be restricted, watched, or discouraged depending on the colony and the temperament of those in charge. White anxiety is revealing. It suggests an uneasy awareness that people who sing together, remember together, and interpret the world together are not as conquered as the system would prefer. Children sense that danger. They notice when adults lower their voices because someone approaches. They notice which songs are acceptable near the main house and which belong to more private hours. They notice that some stories are told boldly and others only to trusted listeners. This awareness does not diminish the meaning of those practices. It sharpens it. There is uncertainty here too, and it matters. Scholars do not always know which elements of early black spiritual and cultural life were widespread, and which were local, which had deep African roots, and which emerged newly in the colonies under shared conditions of bondage. The archive is incomplete and often hostile. Yet the broad picture remains clear enough. Black children in 1710 were not blank slates waiting to be filled by the slave system. They were born into communities already making culture, already transmitting values, already finding ways to remain human under oppression. That humanity is often most visible in the smallest scenes. A woman braiding a child's hair while speaking of patience. An elder pausing before a meal to murmur words no master taught them. A group of children inventing a rhyme while carrying wood. A grieving adult refusing to let a dead person vanish without a proper name, a proper memory, a proper goodbye. These things do not look dramatic beside laws and ledgers. They are more important than laws and ledgers for understanding how people actually lived. By the time sleep begins to pull at your eyes, the room has changed again. The fire is lower, shadows move slowly, voices are softer now, carrying through smoke and dark like thread through cloth. Somewhere outside, insects pulse in the grass. You listen from your corner, from a lap, from a blanket, from that half-awake place where children hear more than the adults suspect. What reaches you is not just comfort, it is inheritance. So you grow within a world of guarded songs, remembered names, hidden meanings, protective habits, and quiet acts of care that the colony can neither fully erase nor fully understand. You are taught the official order by force every day. But beneath it runs another education, one made of rhythm, story, spirit, caution, and belonging. That education does not free your body. It does something subtler and just as vital. It reminds you that you come from people who know how to carry life through darkness without letting darkness define the whole of it. Fear in the colonies is not always loud. Sometimes it arrives as a pause in conversation, a hand that stops moving, a glance toward the road. For a black child in 1710, fear is part of the ordinary atmosphere, mixed into the smell of smoke, mud, sweat, and salt air. It does not visit now and then. It lives nearby, waiting to be recognized. You learn this from the adults first. A woman hears hoofbeats and straightens at once. A man lowers his voice when strangers pass the fence. An older boy who was joking a moment ago suddenly looks toward the big house and says nothing more. The shift is quick, and children notice quick shifts better than most people. You may not know every reason, but your body understands the signal. Something is near. Something requires care. Punishment is one of the colony's favourite teaching tools. White adults describe it as correction, discipline, order, improvement, even duty. They have many tidy words for other people's suffering. In practice, punishment means pain, humiliation, threat, and spectacle. It can be physical, verbal, or psychological. Sometimes all three together. A child in slavery grows up knowing that mistakes are rarely treated as simple mistakes. They're treated as breaches in a hierarchy that must be repaired. The warning often begins in sound. Your name called too sharply, boots approaching over packed ground, the scrape of a chair pushed back with force, a leather strap lifted from a peg, the house falling oddly quiet because everyone senses what is coming. These sounds sink into memory. Long after the moment passes, a similar sound can tighten your shoulders before you even think. Children may be punished for slowness, clumsiness, inattention, missing tools, broken dishes, wandering too far, speaking out of turn, fighting, stealing food, or simply being present when an adult wants someone to blame. The specific reason matters less than the pattern. Power reserves the right to define offence broadly. That uncertainty is part of the control. If the rules are elastic, fear has more room to work. A mainstream fact of early slavery is that violence was built into the daily management of enslaved life. It was not reserved for rare rebellion. It shaped labour, movement, speech, family life, and childhood. Physical punishment could begin young, sometimes in so-called moderate forms first, but the lesson behind it was always larger than the immediate act. Your body was not fully your own. The colony wanted you to know that early. Humiliation can sting as much as pain. Stand in the yard and be scolded before others. Hold out your hands for inspection. Repeat an apology you barely understand. Be compared to animals, tools, or burdensome objects. Be laughed at by white children learning cruelty from their elders. Shame is useful to the system because it teaches a child to monitor themselves even when no blow falls. You begin to read danger in faces. A master with lips pressed thin. A mistress smiling in a hard way that never means kindness. A white child suddenly too pleased with your discomfort. A visitor whose presence makes the adults uneasy. This skill becomes almost automatic. Some children grow quiet and still when danger nears. Others become extra helpful, hoping usefulness will make them less visible. Some cannot hide their feelings and suffer for it. Temperament matters, but fear trains everyone. Outside the household, watchfulness takes other forms. In many colonies, especially where enslaved populations are growing, white authorities worry constantly about movement, gathering, theft, escape, and rebellion. Their fear becomes policy. Patrols, inspections, pass requirements, curfews, questioning by strangers, and harsh local enforcement create an environment where black mobility is treated as suspicious by default. A child absorbs this simply by noticing where adults may go freely and where they cannot. The road can feel dangerous in a special way. Dust rises from wagons, horses snort, men ride by who ask questions not meant kindly. The open path looks like freedom from a distance, but nearby it often feels like exposure. A child sent on an errand may know exactly where to place their feet, how quickly to answer if stopped, and how not to look uncertain. Uncertainty attracts attention, and attention is risky. Patrol culture is stronger in some places than others, but the principle is widespread. White men organize themselves as the watchers of black movement and behavior, whether formally or informally, because slave societies are obsessed with surveillance. They want to know who is where, with whom, and why. Historians still debate how systematic local enforcement was in every colony and district at this date, because practice could vary a good deal. But children did not need perfect legal consistency to feel the pressure. Suspicion itself was enough. Night sharpens that pressure. Darkness gives a little privacy, but it also makes white fear more intense. A knock after sunset can chill a whole room. Dogs barking in the distance make adults pause. Firelight suddenly seems too bright or too revealing. If someone has not returned when expected, every small sound feels charged. Children lying half awake pick up all of this. They hear the grown people breathing differently. There are also the punishments that do not land on you directly but still shape you. Watching another child scolded, struck, or dragged forward for correction can be deeply instructive in the worst way. You learn from what happens to them. Do not spill. Do not laugh there. Do not run when called. Do not let your face show too much. Slave societies rely on this shared witnessing. A punishment is rarely meant for one person alone. It is a message sent through the whole community. The message is simple. We can reach you. That reach extends into family life as well. Parents may discipline children themselves, not only out of ordinary care, but because the consequences from white authority can be much worse. A mother may hiss a warning sharper than she wishes. An older sibling may pull you back by the arm with startling force. A father may insist on obedience in ways that feel severe because he is trying to prepare you for a harsher world. Love and fear become tangled together. A child may resent the sharpness before understanding its purpose. The physical surroundings often heighten dread. The yard seems too open when punishment happens there. The doorway frames every onlooker. The smell of trampled grass or wet dirt clings to the moment. In a house, the walls can make shouting feel closer than it is. In a field, there is nowhere to hide from the sight of it. Weather does not soften much. A hot day makes anger feel meaner. A cold day makes exposure more miserable. Rain turns ground slippery and clothes heavy, which is no comfort at all when someone has decided to make an example of you. There are strange little details children remember for years. The buzzing of flies during a scolding, the way a chicken wanders foolishly through a serious scene, the smell of leather, a loose thread on your sleeve that you stare at because looking at faces is too hard. Fear often attaches itself to small objects. Later, seeing something similar can bring the whole feeling back at once. White neighbours are part of the machinery too. Slave control does not depend only on masters and mistresses. It also depends on a wider agreement among white colonists that black life should be monitored, restricted, and returned if it strays beyond permitted bounds. A child learns that not every smiling stranger is safe. Many are not. The wider community may gossip, report, confront, or assist in capture because the system asks it of them and rewards the habit. There is a fringe detail in some colonial writing that reveals the mentality clearly. White observers sometimes describe black children as needing firm discipline from the start, as though harshness were a form of moral gardening. The language can sound almost tender while meaning something brutal. This is one of the colony's ugliest talents, wrapping domination in the vocabulary of care. Children hear the tone before they grasp the lie beneath it, yet fear does not erase intelligence. In fact, it often sharpens it. You learn which corners conceal you from a window, which adults cool down quickly, and which ones nurse a grievance. Which chores are safest to perform where everyone can see you. Which younger children must be hushed before their noise draws trouble. Which paths through the yard crunch less underfoot. Which excuse may work and which will only anger someone more. These are not lessons any child should need. They become normal anyway. Some children become excellent at anticipation. If the master is in poor temper, they move faster without being asked. If guests are present, they know the household will want a display of order. If a white child looks ready to complain, they offer help before the complaint forms. This anticipatory labour is exhausting because it asks the mind to remain alert even in moments of supposed rest. Fear keeps the senses employed. Religion can deepen the atmosphere rather than ease it. White authority may invoke God, sin, and obedience to justify punishment, telling children that correction saves the soul or improves the character. Imagine hearing moral language wrapped around cruelty often enough. It does not necessarily make you doubt suffering. More likely it teaches you that power loves a sermon. Black children may still find spiritual comfort through prayer and communal belief, but they also learn that religion in white hands can become another instrument of control. The uncertainty of danger may be the hardest part. Not every day brings punishment. Not every white person erupts. Some hours pass with ordinary work, ordinary talk, ordinary tiredness. Then something small shifts and the whole mood changes. Because harm is unpredictable. The body never rests completely. A child may laugh one moment and flinch the next. That is not inconsistency. That is adaptation. Even so, community builds quiet methods for enduring fear. Adults exchange warnings with a look. Older children steer younger ones away from trouble. People soften one another afterward with water, food, touch, humour, or simple presence. Someone says, "Sit here." Someone rubs your back. Someone distracts you with a foolish story about a goose, a pig, or a man too proud for his own good. Recovery matters. Without it, fear would swallow childhood whole. You also discover that terror can coexist with boredom, annoyance, and ordinary silliness. That may sound strange, but it is true. A child can spend the morning dreading punishment, the afternoon irritated by a heavy bucket, and the evening giggling over a crooked hat. Emotional life under slavery is not one flat note. It is complicated because children remain alive inside it. They do not become symbols. They remain themselves, still. By the end of the day, the lessons settle in your body. Keep your voice measured. Keep track of tools. Watch the road. Notice who is drinking. Notice who is angry. Stay close when told. Disappear when needed. Trust carefully. Answer promptly. Share warnings. Fear becomes less an event than a discipline imposed from outside and carried inward, so you grow up surrounded by punishments both seen and anticipated, by roads watched by suspicious eyes, by households that can turn hard in a breath, and by a wider colony determined to keep black movement and black possibility under guard. The result is not simple obedience. It is childhood shaped by vigilance. You learn that safety is never guaranteed and often borrowed. You learn that control has many faces, and because you are a child, you learn all this not in theory but in the stomach, in the skin, in the ear that wakes at night to hoofbeats and already knows to listen. At some point, people stop speaking of you as little, even if you still feel little in many ways. The shift does not arrive with ceremony. No one gathers to praise your growth or announce a gentler future. Instead, the work asked of you grows heavier. The watch kept on you grows sharper, and the colony begins to look at your body with a harder, more appraising eye. For a black child in 1710, the edge of adulthood is less a doorway than a tightening net. You feel it first in expectation. Tasks that once came with instruction now come as assumptions. Carry this, lift that, watch the younger ones, finish before dark. Adults stop checking whether the load is too much and start wondering why it took so long. A mistake that might once have been called childish now sounds like laziness or stubbornness. The world does not become more patient as you grow. It becomes more demanding. Your body changes under constant use. Muscles toughen from carrying wood, water, baskets, tools, and children. Hands roughen. Bare feet learn every surface by memory. Shoulders broaden or stoop depending on the labour repeated most often. Growth should be a private marvel, something discovered with surprise and maybe a little pride. Under slavery, growth is often noticed as utility. Stronger arms, taller frame, better reach. A girl nearing womanhood may be measured by household usefulness and future childbearing. A boy nearing manhood may be sized up for field strength, hauling, tool work, or the threat he might someday pose if not closely controlled. It is a chilling way to be seen. A mainstream fact of early American slavery is that adolescence had no secure legal or social protection for the enslaved. Instead of opening a path toward independent adulthood, it usually marked deeper incorporation into labour and stronger surveillance. The colony did not ask what kind of person you hoped to become. It asked what kind of worker or breeder you might become for someone else's advantage. That is the brutal arithmetic waiting at the edge of childhood. Girls often feel this transition in especially intimate and difficult ways. Menstruation, bodily development, and increased household responsibilities place them under new forms of scrutiny from mistresses, masters, and the wider enslaved community. Work does not pause because the body hurts or bleeds. You keep moving. You haul, scrub, stir, mend, carry, soothe, and endure. Older women may give practical guidance in low voices, sharing cloth, wisdom, warnings, and whatever comfort can be managed. The room smells of soap, ash, old linen, and worry. Their advice is tender because the world is not. For boys, the shift can bring a different kind of attention. You may be pushed harder in field labour, trained in handling animals or tools, sent farther on errands, or judged for how quickly you obey. A taller body can attract suspicion as much as respect. White men often view growing black boys through a fearful lens, imagining insolence or danger before any exists. Strength that benefits them in labour may alarm them in every other context. So adolescence becomes a trap. You are expected to become more capable, but not more self-possessed. The sounds of this stage are louder somehow. The thud of heavier bundles, the scrape of a hoe biting soil, the grunt of effort you do not quite want anyone to hear, the sharper tone adults use when they expect more, the muttered teasing of older youths trying to pretend exhaustion is amusing. Laughter remains, but it is drier now. more knowing. You also become aware of reputation among enslaved people. Elders watch to see whether you are reliable, reckless, proud, generous, foolish, quick-tempered, or kind to younger children. Among white people, reputation can affect assignment, punishment, and opportunity in narrow but meaningful ways. A child thought obedient may be placed inside the house more often. One thought troublesome may face harsher work or closer correction. These labels are not fair, and they can be shaped by whim, prejudice, and lies. But they matter because power believes in them. Historians still debate how distinct adolescence was as a recognised life stage among the enslaved in the early 18th century, because the records often collapse young people into broad labour categories. Yet the body itself makes a distinction, and communities do too. There are new talks now, new warnings, new tests, new jokes. An older girl may glance at you differently and tell you to stand straight. A man may tell a boy to mind his temper because some white men are waiting for an excuse. Social life thickens around maturity even when the law refuses to honour it. There are awkwardnesses too, because youth remains youth. A growing boy may suddenly be all elbows and uncertainty, strong in one task and absurdly clumsy in the next. A girl trusted with serious duties may still laugh helplessly when a chicken escapes the yard or a goat behaves like a minor demon. Bodies changing under hard labour do not become solemn all at once. There are still blushes, boasts, whispered crushes, sharp embarrassments, and rivalries that seem enormous at the time. This matters because it reminds you that enslaved young people were not born old. The world tried to age them quickly, but traces of youth kept slipping through. Food and fatigue shape this passage heavily. A growing body needs more than many colonies provide. Hunger sits deeper. Limbs ache after long work. Sleep comes fast, but not always long enough. Clothing fits badly because you are growing, yet replacement remains uncertain. A sleeve rides up the arm. Trousers or skirts fall oddly. Shoes, if you have them, become cruel when too small. Adolescence is physically awkward, even in comfort. Under deprivation, it can feel like the body is negotiating with the world using very poor terms. Work often becomes more specialised now. A girl may be trusted with spinning, dairy work, advanced kitchen tasks, nursing younger children, or fine sewing if she has the skill. A boy may move toward ploughing, cutting timber, cart work, animal care, or more sustained field labour. In town, youths might assist in workshops, carry goods through streets, serve in inns, or become increasingly useful to merchants and artisans. Skill can bring a small measure of pride because it proves competence before your own people as much as before owners. But skill also raises value in the market sense, which is a terrible shadow over every accomplishment. That shadow grows darker as you realise adults may speak of you in terms of price, perhaps not before you directly, or perhaps very much before you, depending on the household's refinement, which is often an overrated quality. They comment on health, teeth, strength, temperament, fertility, obedience, promise. Words that should belong to a person's becoming are bent into terms of appraisal. You begin to understand that your future might be altered by someone's debt, ambition, marriage settlement, inheritance plan, or whim. This knowledge can make the very fact of growing feel dangerous. For girls and young women, another fear enters plainly. Sexual vulnerability is part of slavery's structure. White male power can turn predatory with little restraint, and the colony offers almost no meaningful protection to black girls. Women in the community know this well and try to warn, shield, distract, or accompany the young where possible. Their warnings may come in fragments, because blunt speech is painful and privacy is scarce. A look can hold a whole lesson. Stay near. Avoid being alone there. Do not trust gifts. The danger is everywhere and nowhere announced. Young men face sexual vulnerability too, though discussed less often in surviving records and often obscured by silence. More visibly, they face the threat of being read as defiant, aggressive, or physically threatening once their bodies mature. The same height that helps with labour may draw harsher discipline. A look held too long becomes insolence. A delayed answer becomes challenge. A natural desire for dignity is recast as danger. The colony fears the person it has helped shape. There are fringe details in this stage of life that feel almost tender by contrast. A carefully braided hairstyle marking pride and age. A patch sewn decoratively on a work garment because beauty still matters to someone. A flirtation carried in teasing remarks while drawing water. A song altered to include a young person's name. Such details reveal that attraction, vanity, humour, and self-making continue even in bondage. Young people still want to be noticed for more than labour. Touch becomes more complicated too. The easy closeness of small childhood gives way to different boundaries. Hands linger or withdraw with new awareness. Elders place a steadying palm on your shoulder before a hard task. A friend bumps you in passing, and you think about it too long afterward. A mother adjusting your collar sees how much you have grown and says nothing for a moment. The body becomes social in new ways, not only useful, but visible. You may also begin to imagine possibilities, though carefully. Could you be hired somewhere else and see more of the world? Could a skilled task make life slightly more bearable? Could you choose a partner? Could you keep one? Could you avoid the worst tempers in the house? Could you one day protect the younger children the way others protected you? These are modest hopes by ordinary standards. Under slavery, even modest hopes can feel daring. At the same time, rumour circulates. Stories of escape, stories of sale, stories of a neighbouring plantation where work is harsher, or a town where conditions are different, stories of war long ago, maroon communities elsewhere, African kingdoms remembered dimly, ships, ports, swamps, and roads leading somewhere beyond your knowledge. Young people are especially alert to such stories because youth leans naturally toward imagining change. The older people listen too, but often with heavier caution. Religion and community continue shaping this age. Elders may press moral advice more firmly now. Be careful who you trust. Do not let anger ride you. Keep your word. Remember who you are. The language may be Christian, African-inflected, practical, or all at once. The point is less doctrine than steadiness. A young person entering harsher adult expectations needs an inner structure to stand on, and still. The colony offers no true coming of age in return. No recognised independence. No secure household of your own. No lawful control over your labour, movement, or future children. You may become physically adult while remaining legally owned. That contradiction sits at the heart of enslaved adolescence. It is a cruel education in what the system values and what it denies. By evening, revealed, when work finally loosens its hold, you feel the changes in your whole body. The ache in the back, the stronger grip, the quicker breath after lifting, the private awareness of becoming someone the world now sees differently. Firelight touches the faces around you, some still soft with childhood, some sharpened by labour, some carrying the settled look of those who already know too much. You are moving toward that knowledge whether you want to or not. So this stage of life arrives without celebration, marked instead by heavier work, deeper scrutiny, new dangers, and the uncomfortable discovery that your growing body means profit, threat, and expectation to others. Yet inside all that, you remain a young person forming a self. You still blush, hope, resent, laugh, admire, fear, and dream. The system tries to translate growth into property value, but growth is never only that. It is also the building of an inner life that cannot be fully measured, however insistently the colony tries. You do not grow up in slavery by learning one lesson only. You learn hundreds, layered one over another until they settle into the muscles, the breath, the way your eyes move across a room. In 1710, for a black child in the English colonies, growing up means becoming familiar with a world that asks for your labour, studies your body, limits your movement, and still never fully understands you. That last part matters. The colony believes it knows what you are. It often does not know who you are at all. By now, your days have trained you in careful noticing. You can hear the difference between ordinary footsteps and angry ones. You know which morning sounds promise routine and which suggest trouble. A wagon rolling slowly toward the yard can carry supplies, news, strangers, or danger. The sigh of a tired woman by the hearth can tell you more than a speech. The smell of smoke, sweat, wet earth, old wool, and boiling cornmeal still belongs to daily life, but so do memory, humour, tenderness, and a kind of inward steadiness nobody meant for you to have. That steadiness is not innocence. Innocence has been denied too early for that. It is something tougher. You have learned that hunger can be constant without becoming ordinary. You have learned that a patched shirt can still be precious, that a warm bowl can change the entire evening, that sleep shared close to another body feels safer than sleep alone. You have learned that family may be held together by voices more than by law, by memory more than by paper, by repeated acts more than by promises, a hand on your shoulder, a warning in a whisper, a name spoken softly in the dark. These are the structures that matter when the official structures are built against you. As you grow, your mind becomes crowded with details that no child should need. Which adults to avoid, which roads invite questions, which white moods can sour a whole day, which tasks are likely to hide mistakes and which put them on display, which stories cheer the younger children, which plants calm fever, which friend can be trusted with a secret, which silence means peace, and which silence means fear. This is knowledge shaped by danger, but it is knowledge all the same. It makes you perceptive, quick, and careful in ways the colony may mistake for simplicity, because power often misunderstands the intelligence of the people it tries to rule. A mainstream historical truth remains impossible to escape. By the early 18th century, slavery in the English colonies had hardened into a racial, hereditary system that pressed itself into every part of black childhood. Law, labour, punishment, family separation, and daily surveillance worked together to make bondage feel permanent. That permanence was one of the system's great ambitions. It wanted to outlast memory. It wanted children to absorb its logic so young that they might never imagine another order. And yet children did imagine otherwise, not always in grand speeches or clear plans, more often in feelings, small acts, and stubborn preferences, in the wish to stay near certain people, in the refusal to let a family name disappear, in the delight taken in a song, a joke, a game with stones, a clever answer almost spoken aloud, in the way older children guarded younger ones, in the way adults passed down stories that made survival seem not noble exactly, but possible. Imagination under slavery is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is simply the insistence that life contains more than what the master notices. The colony notices plenty, of course. It notices height, strength, obedience, fertility, speed, health, and price. It notices when labour increases and when tools go missing. It notices lateness. It notices fatigue only when fatigue threatens output. But it rarely notices interior life with any humility. White observers may describe black children as cheerful, idle, stubborn, sly, affectionate, or naturally suited to service, depending on what excuses they need that day. They flatten complexity because complexity would force them to recognise a person where they prefer to see property. That flattening does not work inside the community itself. Among black families and households, children are known in fuller ways. This one is quick to laugh. That one watches everything. This girl can calm any baby. That boy will climb anything with branches, which is brave in theory and foolish in practice. One child sings under the breath when nervous. Another goes quiet and stares at the floor when angry. One needs comfort after a scolding. Another pretends not to. The people who love you know your habits, talents, weaknesses, and moods. They may not have the power to secure your future, but they do have the power to witness your personhood, and that is no small thing in a society determined to reduce you. There is uncertainty in the history, and it should be spoken plainly. Historians do not know every detail of what a single black child in 1710 felt, feared, hoped, or remembered from one season to the next. The surviving records come mostly from people with authority, people who counted bodies, listed tasks, wrote laws, described punishments, and recorded transactions. Children's own voices are much harder to recover. Sometimes they survive later in life through recollection. More often they survive indirectly, in the shape of communities, in patterns of family formation, in small signs of cultural continuity, in the gaps where official accounts fail to explain how people remained human at all. That uncertainty should make the story humbler, not emptier. The body, though, leaves clues history can still feel. Bare feet hardened by long paths, hands taught early to carry and scrub, stomachs used to too little, shoulders already learning the habits of labour, ears quickened by warning, eyes trained to read faces. A child shaped by these conditions enters adulthood differently from a child promised safety and leisure. The damage is real, so is the endurance. Both belong to the truth. There are fringe details that linger in the imagination because they reveal so much in so little. A hidden charm tucked into a wall, a nickname that never enters the ledger, a carved toy from scrap wood, a little patch stitched neatly onto worn cloth because somebody wanted beauty to survive one more week. These fragments remind you that life in slavery is not only a record of deprivation, it is also a record of creation under pressure. Black children do not merely endure the world made for them, they help make another world inside it, stitched from song, caution, humour, touch, food, language, and care. And still, the harder truth remains. Many will not escape. Many will be sold, worked down, sickened, bereaved, or buried without proper notice from the larger colony. Childhood does not protect them. Talent does not protect them. Christian baptism does not protect them. Good behaviour does not reliably protect them. This system is not cruel because a few people behave badly within it. It is cruel because its normal operation requires domination to remain normal. For black children, that means even the gentler moments are lived under threat. Perhaps that is why gentleness matters so much when it appears. A cool cloth on a fevered head, a shared crust, a voice humming in the dark, someone braiding your hair with tired fingers and patient care, a joke at the right moment, a place near the fire, a warning given before danger arrives, a name remembered, a story repeated so often it becomes a shelter. These are not grand rescues. They are the daily forms of mercy available to people with little power. Yet they shape a life. They tell a child that being loved is still possible in a place designed to deny full humanity. You carry all of this as you grow. Not neatly, not without confusion. You may feel fear and laughter in the same afternoon, resentment and affection in the same room, weariness in the body and restlessness in the mind. You may long for protection and resist control at once. Such contradictions are not signs of weakness. They are signs that you are alive, still responding, still becoming. Slavery wants fixed categories. Real children refuse to fit them. So what was it like for black Americans in 1710 growing up in early slavery? It was cold boards under thin bedding. It was smoke in the throat at dawn. It was coarse cloth, bare feet, and food stretched past generosity. It was family built under threat. Culture carried in whispers, labour learned too young, and punishment waiting nearby. It was watchfulness so practiced it became almost instinct. It was the ache of growing under someone else's claim. But it was also more than suffering alone. It was the sound of a familiar voice cutting through fear. The strength of elders who remembered names and meanings. The invention of games from almost nothing. The quiet pride of skill. The comfort of shared warmth. The stubborn life of stories. The possibility of joy appearing suddenly in the middle of hardship and refusing to apologize for itself. It was childhood, narrowed, burdened, and endangered, yet never wholly emptied of imagination or love. As night settles now, the colony grows quieter, the air cools, smoke thins above the fire. Outside, insects pulse in the dark grass, and somewhere farther off water moves with its old patient sound. The room around you is plain, the world around you is unjust, yet here, in the last softness of evening, the body unclenches a little, breath slows, a blanket rustles, someone nearby shifts in sleep. The day loosens its hold, not completely, but enough. You let the sounds grow gentler, the floor no longer feels so hard, the dark no longer feels so watchful. The voices that shape the evening fade into murmurs, then into memory. Warmth gathers in small places, under the blanket, near the hearth, in the steady rhythm of breathing around you. Whatever the colony has tried to make of this life, the night holds one quiet truth. You were always more than what was counted, more than what was ordered, more than what was owned. So the room drifts softly at the edges. Smoke becomes shadow. Shadow becomes calm. The long day settles like dust after motion. Your hands grow still. Your thoughts soften. The names, songs, warnings, and kindnesses carried through the dark remain near, gentle as a low voice at the end of a story. And as the fire sinks into ember and the world finally lowers its noise, you rest inside that small surviving warmth, held for a little while by memory, by breath, and by the deep quiet that comes at last.